The day she stood at my door and called my daughter hers, something inside me shattered, and I knew my life was about to break open. I still remember the way the wind moved that evening, slow, sticky, humid, like the air itself didn't want to carry the weight of what was coming. I had just finished cooking lentils for dinner, the kind my daughter liked because I mashed them into a smooth paste, and she'd swirl her spoon around the bowl, pretending she was stirring magic. It was strange how life could look so ordinary on the outside, right before everything fell apart. I heard a knock, soft, almost hesitant. My heart didn't expect danger, just another evening, just another visitor. When I opened the door, I saw her, my sister-in-law, Ria. Her eyes were swollen, fingers clenched into the sides of her handbag. She inhaled deeply, as if she needed courage just to speak. And then, in a voice too steady to be comforting, she said, "Didi, I've come to take my daughter." At first, I actually turned my head, just slightly, toward the living room, toward the real daughter, sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring the corners of her notebook, humming the same nursery rhyme I'd taught her years ago. The sunlight hit her face through the curtains, soft and warm. My child, my world. My throat tightened. "What?" I whispered, but it came out like sandpaper. Ria swallowed. 10 years, Didi. I raised her for 10 years. Now I want her back. Her words clung to the air like smoke. I didn't understand, or maybe I refused to, because the house, my house, suddenly felt too small for the truth she carried. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, gently, as if the wood could protect my daughter from hearing words she wasn't ready for. My palms were sweating. My heartbeat drummed against my ribs. "Ria, what are you saying?" I breathed. "She's my daughter." Ria looked at me. No anger, no hate, just a terrible, unbearable sadness. "You promised," she whispered. The rest of the world fell silent. A street dog barked in the distance. A distant scooter engine coughed to life. Someone shouted from a neighboring rooftop. But all those sounds seemed far away, muffled, unreal. I could only hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't know then that this moment, this single evening, would unravel 10 years of motherhood, love, sacrifice, and lies. What I also didn't know was this. Everything I believed about my daughter's life was about to look different once the truth surfaced. Before all this, before the knocking, the demand, the knife-cutting words, I had a life that felt simple, ordinary, almost gentle. I used to wake up before dawn, mostly because I loved the quiet. The mornings were my sanctuary. The smell of wet soil from the potted plants on my balcony, the hiss of water boiling for tea, the soft thud of my daughter's little feet whenever she woke up early and came running to sit on my lap. Her name was Aashi. I named her after the very thing she brought into my life: light. She was 10 now, bright-eyed, endlessly curious, always asking questions like, "Mama, why do clouds float? Mama, why do people fight if they say they love each other? Mama, do you think my smile looks like yours or Papa's?" Every time she asked the last one, something tender inside me twisted. Because in her smile, I didn't always see myself. I saw the child she used to be when she first came to me. Back then, she was tiny, fragile, barely a year old. She clung to me as if I were the only person in the world who could protect her. I used to hold her late into the night, rubbing circles on her back while humming lullabies my own mother once sang to me. Those were the days when our home was filled with the things that make a life meaningful. Warm tea shared on the balcony, folded laundry that smelled of jasmine soap, and the worn-out wooden dining table my husband and I bought with our first combined paycheck. And in the middle of all of that was my sister-in-law, Rhea. Back then, she wasn't the woman at my door demanding to take my daughter away. No, she was something else entirely. She was family. I remember her laughter, loud, unfiltered, her voice, quick and sharp when she worried, soft and musical when she tried to comfort someone. She used to visit often, holding Aashi's little hands and teaching her how to walk. Sometimes I'd walk into the living room and find them curled up together on the rug, Aashi's head on her lap. Back then, it brought me comfort. Back then, it felt like love. And my husband? Well, he wasn't perfect, but he had his gentle days, his quieter days, days when he'd sit beside me, slice fruits for Aashi, and talk about dreams we hadn't dared to chase. But beneath the surface of that seemingly peaceful life, there was something else. A silence. A space between us that slowly grew, year after year, like an unwelcome shadow. I ignored it then. I thought all marriages had phases. I told myself every household carried its own private aches. What I didn't realize was this. The silence I kept walking around was built from secrets, and those secrets were about to claw their way to the surface. Even after my husband passed away suddenly, 5 years ago, it was just Aashi and me. Our house felt emptier, but motherhood kept me grounded, busy, breathing. People often think grief is loud, wailing, screaming, breaking, but mine was quiet. It lived in small things. The untouched cup on the dining table, the empty half of the bed, the shirts I kept in his cupboard even when they no longer smelled like him. But Aashi, she was my anchor, my reason to keep moving. Every morning I packed her school lunch, paratha rolls, fruit, a tiny sweet for comfort. She'd give me a sloppy goodbye kiss that always landed slightly off my cheek. She'd say, "Mama, don't forget to smile today." And I would, because she told me to. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It felt steady, safe. Until the day Rhea came back after years of distance. Until the day she looked at my daughter with something unfamiliar flickering in her eyes. Until the day she stood at my door and said the one thing I feared most. I came to take her back. And everything began to unravel. After that evening, the house felt different. Air heavy, shadows longer than usual. Even the small things that once gave me comfort, the hum of the refrigerator, the scent of my morning tea, the clatter of Aashi's pencils on the table, seemed muted, as if the world itself were holding its breath. I couldn't shake Rhea's words. I want her back. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Perhaps she was joking or confused. Maybe grief had twisted her memory of the early years. But her tone, the calm insistence, refused to leave my mind. Every time I glanced at Aashi, I felt a pang of fear, like a knife pressed against my ribcage. I began noticing small, subtle things that hadn't seemed strange before. One evening, I walked into the living room to find Aashi's old photo albums pulled off the shelf, pages spread open, pictures of her as a toddler, smiling, small hands clutching me. Her first steps were carefully circled and underlined, in Rhea's handwriting. I froze. "Rhea, when did you—" I began, but she was already busy stacking the photos back neatly, avoiding my gaze. "Oh, I just wanted to see how she's grown," she said lightly. "It's been so long." Something in her voice didn't fit the words, a tension I couldn't name. Then the calls began. Long, late-night phone calls that Aashi never told me about. When I tried to listen in, Ria's voice was calm, soft, almost affectionate. "She's doing so well," I would hear. But the way Ashi's voice wavered, unsure and hesitant, made my stomach knot. The next clue came one rainy afternoon. I returned home early from work, an unexpected day off, and found Ria sitting at the kitchen table with Aashi, papers spread around them. They were laughing, pointing at something on the documents. Just some fun school stuff," she said quickly, sensing my presence. But then I saw it. An official-looking letter with Ashi's name on it. A guardian or custody form? I couldn't tell yet. My hands trembled as I picked it up, scanning the fine print. Legal jargon. Dates from years ago. My heart dropped. I turned to Ria. What is this?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She leaned back in her chair and said quietly, almost tenderly, "I did what had to be done to keep her safe. But now," she broke slightly, "it's time she comes home with me." I felt like the floor beneath me had disappeared. For weeks after, I watched closely. Every gesture, every glance. Aashi sometimes whispered Ria's name in her sleep. Sometimes she'd tell me things she said she learned from Ria. Little habits, little stories, things I had never taught her. I started doubting myself. Had I imagined the closeness they had shared? Had Ria always been too involved? Or worse, had I given more trust than she deserved? I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong. One evening, I made the decision. I had to know the truth. I went through the small wooden drawer in Ashi's room where I kept her certificates and early medical records. My hands shook as I sifted through papers, receipts, forms. And there it was. A custody agreement, filed 10 years ago. Not with me, not with my husband who had passed, but with Ria, my sister-in-law. I sank to the floor. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. My breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. Temporary guardianship granted to Ria Sharma until further notice. It wasn't temporary. Not anymore. Not in her mind. I remembered all the moments I'd entrusted her with Aashi. Her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, every bedtime story she had read, every scraped knee she had kissed. And somehow, in all that time, she had built a life with my child, as if she were the mother. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just legal, it was emotional. My daughter, my little Aashi, was thriving, yes, but not with me. And Ria had claimed that love for herself. I confronted her the next day, my voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. She looked at me with calm eyes, almost sorrowful. I thought it was best. You were grieving. I was helping. I only wanted her to have stability. You stole her from me, I said, anger and disbelief mixing in my chest. "She never stole her," she replied, voice steady. "I raised her because no one else could, but I can't give her back. Not really. She's part of me now, too." I felt my knees weaken. Part of me wanted to scream, to hit, to collapse in despair. But I also knew that Ashi's well-being was my priority. And beneath Ria's calm exterior, I sensed a fear. She knew how much I loved my daughter. She knew she had made a mistake. And suddenly, everything became clear. This wasn't about malice. This was about power, control, and fear. She wasn't just asking for custody. She was asserting a decade-long claim. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. I walked the house in circles, listening to Ashi's soft breathing in the next room. Every laugh, every sigh, every small sound reminded me of the life I had lost. I spoke to her gently, careful not to scare her. Mama will always be here. Always. She smiled, but her small hand held mine tightly, as if she had felt the fragility of the bond she didn't fully understand yet. And I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was a battle for her heart, for her sense of belonging. I had to act, carefully, deliberately, because the wrong step could shatter her trust forever. The night after I discovered the guardianship papers, I barely slept. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and Ashi's soft breaths from her room. Every tick felt like a countdown. Every breath she took reminded me that I could not let her be pulled away, not by anyone. I made a plan, though it felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. I couldn't be rash. I couldn't yell. I couldn't show the panic that churned inside me. I had to be clever, calm, strategic. I started with small, careful observations. I watched Ria's movements, her routine, the way she interacted with Aashi. She tried to keep everything calm as though nothing was wrong. But there were cracks, small hesitations when I approached, subtle tension when she answered questions I hadn't asked directly, and always, the way she lingered too long near the photo albums or Ashi's old keepsakes. The first step was documentation. Every visit, every conversation, every unusual comment I recorded, not for vengeance, but for truth. I copied old messages between Ria and my husband, found old emails from the early days when she had first offered to help raise Aashi. It painted a picture I could not ignore. Ria had not simply been helpful. She had slowly, steadily inserted herself into my daughter's life, creating bonds, routines, and memories that, from Ashi's perspective, seemed hers. I didn't confront her immediately. That would have been reckless. Instead, I tried subtle tests. One afternoon, I suggested to Aashi that we bake cookies together, something she and I always did. "Can Ria join us?" she asked quietly. "No," I said gently, holding her hand. "Just us this time." Her small frown tugged at my heart, but I noticed something else. She hesitated, looking toward Ria as though she expected her to appear at any moment. Ria had been trying, unconsciously perhaps, to position herself as the default caregiver. And now I needed to remind Aashi, softly, that I was her mother. Next, I sought advice, not from friends who might take sides emotionally, but from someone I trusted, an old family lawyer who had known my husband. He reviewed the guardianship documents I had discovered. Temporary guardianship does not override parental rights indefinitely, he explained, his voice calm, measured. I swallowed hard. That phrase, long-term bond, hit like a hammer. 10 years of Ashi's life, 10 years in which Ria had been more than just an aunt. She had been a mother figure. Ashi's heart didn't recognize the technicalities. And so the battle was no longer just about legalities. It was about careful, delicate persuasion. I needed to reclaim my daughter's trust, her love, and her sense of security without shattering the small stability Ria had provided. I started small. I told Aashi stories from her early childhood, things only her mother would know. The way she used to curl her tiny fists when she laughed, the song we made up for rainy afternoons, the smell of the mangoes we shared last summer. I sprinkled in memories, asking questions, Like, do you remember the yellow blanket you loved so much? Ashi's eyes lit up. Yes, Mama. Do you remember how we danced around the kitchen when it rained? Yes, she said, giggling. And slowly, I began to see her eyes turning toward me, noticing my presence not as a visitor or a familiar adult, but as her mother. Meanwhile, I arranged for casual conversations with Ria. I did not accuse. I asked, I listened, I learned that in her mind, she was acting out of protection. She feared that I wasn't capable of raising Aashi alone after my husband's death. She had convinced herself that keeping my daughter close to her was better, but her eyes betrayed a deep-rooted entitlement, a belief that after 10 years, she had earned rights over my child. I realized then that the fight would not be easy, it would not be swift. It would require patience, poise, and subtle strategy. I had to tread carefully, because if I pushed too hard, I risked alienating Aashi or escalating Ria's resolve. One evening, I decided to bring up the legal aspect, not to threaten, but to plant awareness. Ria, I said, folding my hands on the kitchen table, I've looked through the documents. Temporary guardianship does not replace parental rights. Aashi is my daughter. She paused, her lips pressed tightly together, eyes not leaving mine. I know, she said quietly, and I know you've been her mother, but Didi, 10 years is a long time. She knows me too. I understand, I said softly, but she needs to know her real mother. She deserves that truth, and I won't take this from you. I want what's right for her. She nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders barely noticeable, but I knew she was calculating, weighing every word. It was during these careful, quiet exchanges that I began to notice a shift in her tone, subtle, almost imperceptible, a softness in her voice when she spoke to me about Aashi, a hesitation when she claimed ownership over memories. I realized then that confrontation wouldn't come from shouting, threats, or anger. It would come from persistence, truth, and gentle reclamation. I also began preparing emotionally. I needed to stay composed in front of Aashi. I needed to ensure she didn't feel torn or guilty. Every smile, every hug, every story I shared was deliberate, an invisible bridge rebuilding the bond that had been stretched thin by years of absence. And while I did all of this, I quietly sought out proof of her legal overreach, consulting records, guardianship filings, and even informal witnesses, neighbors, teachers, family friends who had seen the way Ria interacted with Aashi over the years. Each piece of evidence was a small brick in a foundation I hoped would withstand the storm, because soon, this storm would hit, and I knew I had to be ready, not just for the court, not just for Ria, but for my daughter.
It was a Wednesday when the tension finally reached the surface. The sky was gray, heavy with rain, and the house seemed to echo every small sound. Ashi's pencil scratching against paper, the drip of water from the leaky balcony, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I remember thinking how ordinary it all felt. Too ordinary for the storm that was about to erupt. Ria had invited me to what she called a family discussion at her home. I knew in my gut that this was no discussion. It was a subtle maneuver, a way to frame the narrative before I had a chance to make my case. But I agreed to go, because appearances mattered, and Ashi's sense of security mattered even more. Her home smelled faintly of incense and polished wood. The living room was neat, too neat, everything in place as if she had been expecting a confrontation. My husband's older brother, her own parents, and a few relatives were there. Everyone looked calm, polite, but I could feel the tension in the room like electricity. Ria smiled at me. Didi, I thought we could talk this through, for Ashi's sake. I nodded. My eyes, however, never left her. She began to recount the story she had woven over the years, the narrative she had told the extended family, the school teachers, even neighbors, that she had been Ashi's primary caregiver, that I was distant, overwhelmed by grief, unable to provide stability. Each word she spoke felt like a knife pressed gently against my chest. When she finished, she leaned back, her expression calm, almost smug. "See," she said, "everyone understands. And honestly, Ashi knows me as her mother too." I stayed silent, letting the words settle like dust in the air. My stomach churned. But I knew silence was dangerous. This wasn't a debate of opinions. It was about the truth and about reclaiming my daughter. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "No," I said softly but firmly. "Ashi is my daughter. You cared for her, yes. You helped raise her. But you are not her mother. I am." The room went quiet. Eyes flickered between Rhea and I. I could feel the weight of judgment, the whispers of relatives debating who was right, who was wrong. Rhea's face hardened. "You have no proof. It's my word against yours. 10 years of evidence, and you say nothing?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folder. Medical records, old school certificates, early childhood photos, letters from neighbors and friends, all meticulously gathered over the past weeks. I laid them on the table, careful not to shatter the fragile calm. The papers rustled as I flipped through them, showing Ashi's birth certificate, hospital records, her earliest documents, all signed by me. This is her life. These are the facts. She was mine from the beginning, and legally, morally, emotionally, she always has been. I saw the color drain from Rhea's face. She tried to interrupt, to counter, but I didn't let her. "And every memory you claim, every bedtime story, every scraped knee you kissed wasn't stolen from you. It was shared. You were part of her life, but you did not replace me, and you cannot erase her bond with her mother." There was a pause. A silence thick enough to choke on. Some relatives shifted in their chairs. Some looked at me with surprise. Some with grudging acknowledgement. The truth, finally, visibly, began to pierce through the carefully constructed narrative Rhea had spun for a decade. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. Not because I had shouted, not because I had threatened, but because truth has a quiet weight that even the strongest lies cannot carry forever. And then, something I didn't expect. Aashi walked in. She had been sitting quietly in the corner, absorbing everything. Her small hands clutched her backpack, knuckles white. Her big, dark eyes darted between us. "Mama?" she whispered. I went to her immediately, dropping to my knees, opening my arms. "Aashi, it's okay. Mama is here." Rhea's jaw tightened. I could see the storm behind her eyes, the anger, the fear, the realization that her claim was crumbling. Aashi hesitated. Then, slowly, she stepped toward me. She didn't run. She didn't throw herself into my arms immediately, but she came. Her small hand slid into mine. The room shifted. Relatives murmured, some offering subtle nods. Rhea tried to speak, to reclaim the moment, but it was too late. The emotional bond, fragile, unspoken, yet undeniable, was reasserting itself. I held Aashi close, whispering softly, "Mama is never leaving you. Ever." I could feel her tiny arms tightening around my neck. I could feel her trust slowly returning, and I knew this was the turning point. Rhea sat back, shoulders slumping, her composure slipping. She looked at me not with hatred, but with a mix of regret and fear. She knew she had overstepped.
She had tried to claim what was never hers to take, and the public exposure, the family witnessing the truth, had shifted the balance irrevocably. From that day on, the power dynamic changed. Ria could no longer casually assert ownership over Aashi. Every word she spoke, every attempt she made to influence decisions, was now filtered through the awareness of truth. And for me, it was a confirmation. Standing firm, gathering evidence, and maintaining calm dignity had been the only path to protect my child without destroying her peace of mind. Later that evening, when we returned home, Aashi curled up beside me on the couch. I felt her small hand on my arm, and I whispered softly, "Mama is here. Always." She smiled. A small, shy smile, but real. And for the first time in months, I felt the burden lift slightly, not completely gone, but lighter. I had reclaimed a part of our lives. The world hadn't shattered completely, and there was hope yet. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Ria's influence, though diminished, would not vanish overnight. Patience, vigilance, and unwavering love would be required for months to come. The public confrontation had shifted the narrative, but the private battle, protecting Aashi's heart and maintaining our bond, was far from over.
After the confrontation, life slowly began to settle into a fragile calm. The tension with Ria didn't vanish overnight, but her attempts to assert control became less frequent, less forceful. I noticed a subtle shift in her behavior. Quiet acceptance, or perhaps quiet retreat. Aashi and I, meanwhile, began the delicate process of rebuilding our bond. It wasn't just about physical presence. It was about trust, emotional reassurance, and reclaiming years that had been overshadowed by someone else's influence. We started with small routines that had been ours long before Ria's presence became central. Our morning balcony tea, coloring together, bedtime stories with the old lullabies I used to hum. Each ritual was a thread, stitching us back together, reinforcing the mother-daughter bond that had never truly been broken. One rainy afternoon, I took Aashi to our favorite park. The smell of wet grass filled the air, and raindrops fell softly, tapping on the umbrella I held above us. She ran ahead, laughing freely, as if a weight had lifted from her small shoulders. "Look, Mama, I can jump puddles now." I smiled, my chest tightening with emotion. "I know, my little one, I know." In moments like this, I felt the quiet triumph of love and persistence. No shouting, no threats, no anger, just steady, patient presence. That was the lesson I had learned. Children respond to consistent care and emotional honesty more than dramatic gestures. Ria continued to visit occasionally, mostly to check in on Aashi or drop off gifts. I allowed it, cautiously. I wanted to maintain civility for Aashi's sake. We never discussed custody again, never acknowledged the previous confrontation. The balance had shifted, and Aashi's life had been restored to a rhythm that felt safe and familiar. It wasn't easy. Some nights I lay awake replaying the confrontation, worrying about lingering resentment, wondering if Ria's influence had left invisible marks. But I reminded myself, the most important thing was Aashi's sense of security, her knowledge that her mother loved her unconditionally. Over the following months, I began to notice small, heartwarming changes. Aashi shared her thoughts more openly, confiding dreams and worries that she had previously reserved for Ria. She sought my guidance on school projects, asked for my opinions, and even argued with the kind of confidence only a child secure in her mother's love can have. One evening, while helping her with homework, she looked up and said softly, "Mama, I'm glad you're my mother." I felt a lump in my throat, tears prickling my eyes.
Oh, Aashi, I'm glad too. I always have been. That small acknowledgement carried the weight of 10 years of struggle, of fear, of uncertainty. It was healing in its purest form, a gentle confirmation that our bond, tested and strained, had endured. I also began to rebuild myself in subtle ways. I returned to hobbies I had neglected, reconnected with friends, and allowed myself to enjoy quiet evenings without constant anxiety. These moments of self-care were not indulgent, they were necessary. By healing myself, I could better support Ashi's growth and emotional well-being. Looking back, I realize now how delicate the threads of family relationships can be. A single secret, a single unspoken agreement can ripple across years, shaping lives in ways no one anticipates. Ria had believed she was acting in Ashi's best interest, but in doing so, she had underestimated the bond between a mother and her child. I learned that confrontation doesn't always need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes truth and calm persistence are enough to reveal injustice and restore balance. And above all, I learned that love, the steady, patient love, has the power to reclaim what was almost lost. I also learned forgiveness. Not easy forgiveness, not blind forgiveness, but the understanding that Ria had acted out of fear and misplaced responsibility, not malice. Holding on to anger would have poisoned the space between us. Instead, I chose boundaries and clarity, combined with compassion. The final step of healing came quietly. One evening, Ria brought a small gift for Aashi, a painted figurine. I accepted it without comment. Ashi's eyes lit up as she held it, and I realized something important. My daughter could love both of us, in her own way, without it diminishing the bond we shared. "Thank you, Ria," I said simply. "She loves it." Ria nodded, and for the first time, I saw relief on her face, a recognition that the fight was over, that she had no further claim. Peace, however tentative, had returned to our home. I began journaling again, writing down memories and reflections. Each entry was a reminder of the journey we had survived and the lessons it had taught me. Strength, patience, compassion, and the quiet power of truth. Aashi and I are still building our life together, day by day. The past cannot be erased, but it no longer controls us. Every laugh, every hug, every whispered mama is a testament to resilience and love. Sometimes I wonder if the world outside understands the quiet battles mothers fight, not just for survival, but for the souls of their children. And I wonder, if you were in my shoes, would you have stood as firm? Would you have found the courage to reclaim a love that had been held hostage for a decade? I share this story because life is fragile, relationships are delicate, and love, steady, patient love, can overcome even the most complicated betrayals. Aashi sleeps beside me now, her breathing calm, her hand resting lightly on mine. I traced her small fingers with my thumb, feeling the warmth and trust she has returned to me. And I know, with every fiber of my being, that this is home.
I've shared my story with you, not because it's unique, but because it's real. Because it shows that love can be tested, even stolen, and yet survive if we hold on with patience, courage, and unwavering care. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or in public arguments. They're fought quietly, in the hearts of those we love. Protecting a child, preserving trust, reclaiming what's rightfully yours, it's messy, it's painful, and it can leave scars. But it's also transformative. Through this journey, I learned that anger and resentment might feel powerful for a moment,
but calm persistence and truth carry far more weight. I learned that boundaries, compassion, and steady presence can heal wounds that no forceful confrontation ever could. Most importantly, I learned that children, our little mirrors of innocence, deserve love that is patient, honest, and consistent. To everyone watching, sometimes life will place impossible choices in your path. Sometimes people will take what you hold dear, not out of cruelty, but out of fear, control, or misguided love. And sometimes reclaiming what's yours isn't about force, it's about wisdom, strategy, and the quiet strength of the heart. So I ask you, if you were in my shoes, faced with betrayal and loss, how would you protect the bond that matters most? How would you balance justice with compassion and reclaim love without breaking it? Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, reflected your own experiences, or gave you hope that love can endure even the darkest times, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories that explore real-life struggles, heartbreaks, and triumphs, consider subscribing and supporting this channel, because every story matters and every heart deserves to be heard.